so let's start with what carbohydrates are. This is a low carbohydrate diet, but what are carbohydrates actually? Well, it's one of the 3 macronutrients, right? So all foods, pretty much all foods tend to contain the 3 macronutrients. So you've got carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. And this is a very simplistic view of food, but pretty much all foods except for, say, oil, which is really just fats, have a certain percentage of each of them in them. Now, when we're talking about a low carbohydrate diet, that's why we call it a low carbohydrate diet instead of a no carbohydrate diet, because unless you just drink oil, it's not possible to do a no carbohydrate diet. Okay, so carbohydrates are sugars or starches. So we can divide them into simple carbohydrates, which are smaller molecules, and complex carbohydrates, which are chains of simple carbohydrates altogether. And these carbohydrates need to be broken down into their simplest form, which is glucose, to be used by your body. So you will find that the smaller the molecule in your food, the quicker it is for your body to use it. So something like a simple sugar, a teaspoon of sugar, is going to be affecting your body a lot faster than if you're eating a complex carbohydrate, which is maybe a vegetable, for which your body has to do a lot of digestion and a lot of breaking down of the carbohydrate chain to make it into a simple sugar. So the thing that you need to remember is the smaller and more simple the sugar is, the quicker the effect is on your body. It powers muscle. So all of our muscles run off carbohydrates. Now, that doesn't mean it has to run off dietary carbohydrates, because unlike the other 2 macronutrients, protein and fat, proteins are, we have essential proteins, and they are proteins that you have to have in your diet in order for your body to function. And it's the same thing with fats. Now, the only carbohydrate that is really needed by your body is fiber. And fiber is different from sugars and starches because it's not able to be digested by your body. So when you eat fiber, it is considered a carbohydrate, but it has no effect on your blood sugar like a simple or a complex carb would have. Does that make sense? Okay, so basically when we're talking about powering your muscles, you have 2 sources of fuel, of carbohydrate. The one will be your blood sugar, which comes from your food directly, and the other is through the breakdown of fats. And fats are really, really, really high density chains of carbohydrates. It's the storage form of carbohydrates. We all know that when we eat too many carbs, when we eat too much pizza, when we eat too much ice cream, and we don't utilize that energy in the body, that we store it as fat, right? So the reverse can happen as well. The stored fat can be used for energy as well. So that's how muscles run always off carbohydrate, but the carbohydrate doesn't have to come from your food. It can come from the breakdown of fat as well. And that's the important thing to remember. And then I touched on fiber. So fiber is the one carbohydrate that your body does require. Now, when we're talking about carbs, a lot of people think, you know, bread, pasta, potatoes, rice, that kind of thing. But actually what people don't know is that vegetables are carbohydrates, fruits are carbohydrates as well. So it's not that you're not going to eat carbohydrates, because we all know that fruits and vegetables are really important for the body, right? So we have to have those foods that contain fiber, and vegetables and fruit are foods that contain fiber. And the reason that we need fiber is basically fiber acts like a little cleaning brush in our digestive system. Basically, it will help everything move through. If you don't have any fiber, things can get stuck, and that's not a situation that we really want to get into. So then we've got good carbs and bad carbs. Now, I've done a little simplistic view here. It's not rocket science. I think we all know that burgers and pizzas aren't that healthy for us. I think that we're past that point now, but there's been a whole discussion over the past 30 years where we were told that that we should eat more healthy whole grains, right? You all remember that diet advice that we should eat more healthy whole grains, and that's where it starts to get blurred between good carbs and bad carbs. Now, obviously, different people tolerate grains differently, but the thing to remember is that grains are the seeds of plants, and the seeds of plants are something that plants don't want us to actually eat because they want to grow. So there are a lot of little toxins and very undigestible things in a lot of grains that, gluten is one of them. That's, gluten-free diet is super famous out there, but there are more plant lectins, that's what they're called, that we find really difficult, and proteins that we find really difficult to digest. So just to remember that when you do go for a healthy whole grain, that we need to look at what that's going to give to our body. Okay, now the good carbs are obviously the green leafy vegetables. We all know we should eat more of those, and the low sugar fruits as well. And we're going to go into fruits a little bit later, because that's always a point that people get confused on. So what is a low carb diet? We have 3 different low carb diets here. The first one is the Atkins diet. And I remember in the 90s and the early 2000s, it was made very, very famous by Jennifer Aniston and Ginger Spice, Jerry Halliwell. Do you guys remember that when she went from Spice Girl to suddenly doing that It's Raining Men flash dance style? Yeah, and she attributed that to the Atkins diet. Now, the Atkins diet was pushed as being the bacon and eggs diet. You could eat as much bacon and eggs and protein and meat and stuff as you wanted, and you would still lose weight. Mercifully, the Atkins diet has been revisited for the modern age. So now it actually contains plenty of fresh, low carbohydrate veggies as well. And Atkins actually goes in 3 stages. The first stage of Atkins is actually a ketogenic stage. So the keto diet is a very, very low carbohydrate diet. In fact, the ketogenic diet for people who don't do any exercise should only be about 20 grams of carbohydrate per day. And just to give you an idea of the 3rd stage of the Atkins diet, which is the maintenance stage, that one is about 100 grams of carbohydrates per day. Now, that still is only about a 30% of what your normal recommended by the industry carbohydrate levels are. However, there are great advantages to actually tweaking your macronutrients. Then the other low carb diet that has been made really, really popular in the last, I'd say about 10 years, is the paleo diet. So paleo is, the theory is that it's a return to the eating of the Paleolithic times, which is before we became farmers. So it's a diet that doesn't include things like grains or dairy products, because the theory is that before we became agricultural or farmers, that these things were not part of our diet. So it centers mainly around grass-fed organic meats, and low carbohydrate vegetables, but it also includes fruit, preferably on the low carbohydrate fruit side, because what paleo proponents actually believe is that the fruit that we have today in the form that we buy it in the supermarket is not like the fruit that was available back in Paleolithic times. The fruit that we have these days is much higher in a lot of carbohydrates, and it's also been genetically modified, well, not genetically modified, but bred to be able to last longer and travel better as well, right? So they say that bananas are 2 times as sweet as what they used to be. The same with apples, and grapes as well were never as sweet as what they actually are now. So they say that the closest fruit to what was available then are things like berries. And berries tend to be the lowest carbohydrate fruit anyway, and also full of really healthy antioxidants, which can really boost your health as well. So I've got some advantages here of a low carbohydrate diet, and I'm going to try to quickly explain to you why they have this. You don't have to take my word for it, but this is why. So low carbohydrates tend to reduce your appetite. They stop you from feeling hunger pangs all the time. And the reason is because it is carbohydrate that spikes your blood sugar. When your blood sugar goes up, you require insulin to let the blood sugar into the cells. Now, what happens is insulin starts to work. It lets the blood sugar into the cells, and suddenly you go from a high blood sugar to a low blood sugar. Now, this messes with your hormones, and insulin has an effect where it then will ask for more glucose. So what you'll get is you'll get a hunger pang straight after, even though you have enough energy in your system. So this is why we always talk about having complex carbohydrates versus simple carbohydrates, because complex carbohydrates have less of an effect on blood sugar than what simple carbohydrates do. That blood sugar spike is less because you have to break it down slower. So blood sugar sustainability is what actually happens in a low carbohydrate diet. Because you don't have carbs readily available to power your body is actually forced to start breaking down fat. Now, it can do that in 2 ways. Number one, it can start to break down the fat in your own body, or it can break down fat in food as well. Now, as soon as your body starts breaking down fat, your body starts to release something called ketones, and ketones suppress your appetite. So that's why when people talk about fasting, and for a lot of you came to my intermittent fasting talk, when we have fasted, not taken in any food for a couple of days, we start to get a spike in ketones, and that actually kills hunger. So you'll find that people that do fasts over 3 to 4 days will completely lose their hunger. They won't be hungry at all after 3-4 days. And that is because of the presence of ketone bodies in the blood. So that's important. And, the other thing is ketones, your mind can run off ketones as well. Your brain can run off ketones. And actually people find that they get really clear thinking on a low carbohydrate diet. And also a low carb diet will mean that it's going to be higher in 2 things. One is protein and one is fat. And both of those macronutrients are known to be satiating. And what that means is that they stay in your stomach for quite a long time. So they keep you fuller for longer. And that's what that means. So all of those 3 things happen together. And that means that your appetite is reduced. Now, obviously, carbohydrates are quick energy. So the body asks for them as soon as it's feeling a lack of energy. So you will always find that when you switch from a high carbohydrate to a low carbohydrate diet, that you will have a transitionary phase where you may not feel the best in terms of energy levels. And that's because your body is having to do a bit of a switcheroo, right? It's having to go from burning quick carbs to actually breaking down fat molecules to be able to produce its energy. And in the same way that you don't walk, you don't run a marathon after only walking for 1 kilometer a day, your body also needs to train to be able to break down fats. Okay, so low carb diets lead to more weight loss at first, okay? So in a study of low carbohydrate diets versus low fat diets, because that tends to be a higher carbohydrate diet, you'll find that the low carb diet, people lose weight faster. And the reason for that is that carbohydrate actually holds water in your body, and as soon as you stop putting carbohydrate into your body starts to release that water. That means that in the first week of a low carbohydrate diet, you'll tend to lose around 2 to 3 kilos, and that's only water. So that's not a real weight loss, it's just water in your cells. But the thing about that is it's super motivating, right? Because losing 2 to 3 kilos of water makes you look a lot leaner as well. It means that you can see an instant difference, and it encourages people to keep going. It is a very simple way of being able to lose weight. But this seminar is not about losing weight. This seminar is also about the health advantages that a low carbohydrate diet can give you. Now, more fat loss comes from your abdominal cavity. And this is really important because one of the big markers for health is what's called visceral fat. One of the most accurate measures that we have is to actually take waist circumference, and waist circumference can very accurately tell you how problematic somebody's health is. And that is because of visceral fat. So visceral fat is your storage. This is where when you consume excessive carbohydrates, that these are going to be stored. Now, subcutaneous fat is basically the fat that's under your skin. It's just below your skin. It's the fat that, makes bingo wings. It's the fat that gives you little chubby cheeks. But it's not necessarily that dangerous to your health unless you have a lot of it, right? But visceral fat, the fat that sits around your organs, actually works like an organ as well, and will start to create its own hormones. And a lot of that is hormones that will make you feel hungrier all the time. So the more visceral fat that you have, the hungrier you will feel all the time because it wants to feed itself. It's very easy for a lot of people to say, oh, well, people that are overweight, it's just a lack of willpower. Well, it's not actually that at all. They're even challenged from a hormonal level. Every hormone, every cell in an obese person's body is saying, I want to eat more food, I want to eat more food, which is why it is a serious problem. And that is why low carbohydrate diets have been seen to be the most effective way of helping people who have a lot of visceral fat, which is the dangerous fat. Okay. So a reduction in triglycerides. So in the same way that waist circumference is a really good marker of health, triglycerides are too. And triglycerides are simply the sugars that you haven't utilized as energy made into a fat ready for storage. They are on their way to the visceral fat to be stored. So basically, triglycerides can be used as energy. So they can be used in your muscles, broken down back into glucose or glycogen, which is the muscle's form of energy. And then they can be used. However, if you don't move and use those triglycerides in the muscles, then they are going to be really elevated into the blood, and then they will be stored in the visceral fat. So it's very important to realize that it is a very strong risk factor if you have a lot of triglycerides in the blood. Now, a low carbohydrate diet actually doesn't let triglycerides come into the blood because they're simply not being generated, because there's no excess of carbohydrate in the blood. Sorry, I've got some people sitting in the, oh no, I have, okay. Do we have questions? Okay. No questions yet. Okay, cool. So being active and being on a low carbohydrate diet is definitely something that's going to be really good for your blood work as well. Okay, so it also increases HDL cholesterol. So when we talk about cholesterol, we've got HDL and LDL, right? So everyone knows that from the blood test that they've had. HDL is supposed to be the good cholesterol, and LDL is supposed to be the bad cholesterol. Now, it's actually very oversimplified because there are good and bad parts of HDL and good and bad parts of LDL as well. However, when we're talking about blood work and health markers, we see that people that are on a low carbohydrate diet have higher levels of HDL cholesterol. And that means that they have less inflammation markers as well. And we'll just talk now, after this slide, we'll talk about inflammation. So low carb and ketogenic diets can be particularly helpful for people with diabetes and insulin resistance. And studies have proven that cutting carbs lowers both blood sugar and insulin levels. So it's been very, very effective at treating metabolic syndrome and people with diabetes. And one of my good friends who is my go-to when I have questions about low carbohydrate or keto diets actually works in a center in Maastricht in Holland. So it's in the south of Holland. And basically it's a center where they only treat people who suffer from diabetes and metabolic syndrome with a ketogenic diet. And they've had massive success in the last 5 years at that, and that's his full-time job. That's all they do at that center, is basically just treat people with what the medical society would have said to them is a death sentence, with a nutritional therapy, and they are completely curing people of these issues with just a dietary intervention. Here we go. So metabolic syndrome, what is it? So this is the syndrome that most adults are expected to get if they continue to eat what's called the standard diet now. So that is, we recognize it, right? It's the abdominal obesity, it's the pot belly, it's the elevated blood pressure, it's the high blood sugar levels when fasting, the high triglycerides, and the low HDL cholesterol levels. And this has been identified as pre-diabetes. So if most people will get this, whether they get it at 40, 50, 60. We were told that it was a genetic condition, but that's actually not the case at all. It is to do with our lifestyle. It's to do with what we eat and what we feed ourselves, and also our lifestyles being sedentary, also being sorry guys, I can't see. where that sound is coming from. Okay, we got it? Yep, thanks, Becca. Yeah. Okay, so I can't get rid of this little window. Here we go. All right. So this is something that a low carbohydrate diet will actually work on for you. Okay, so decreased inflammation, and this is something that all of you should be really, really interested in, because a lot of us live very high stress lives, and high stress is something that creates a lot of inflammation in the body. In addition to, you know, diets that are too high in simple carbohydrates, too much sugar, too many pizzas, too many burgers, that kind of thing. All of those things cause inflammation. Now, a low carbohydrate diet is usually a higher fat diet. And if you eat the right kinds of fats, so the omega-3 fats, the saturated fats, then you'll find that that really soothes inflammation in the body. You've got to take out all of the man-made fats, all of the sunflower oil, all of the canola oil, that kind of thing that is sold in big 2-liter containers in the supermarket, and replace it with good quality whole food sourced oils, things like avocado oil, olive oil, oily fish, avocados in themselves, nuts, and lots of different healthy oils that you can have in your diet. Now, a low carbohydrate diet doesn't leave a lot of room for grains, because grains tend to be quite high in carbohydrates, and also inflammatory. We talked about that before, about the lectins in plant seeds that can really cause problems for your digestive system. Obviously, a decrease in sugar and simple sugars as well, and that's beneficial for the body, so that you don't get spikes in blood sugar and you stop utilizing insulin all the time because you don't need it. And then, of course, that decrease in triglycerides, simply because you're not having to store an excess of carbohydrates that you don't use. All right, so let's have a little bit of a look at what a low carb diet looks like. So at the top, I think back in the day we had the food pyramid, and the bottom was carbohydrates, I think, right? So we don't even see them. We don't see bread and pasta and rice on here anymore. It's actually completely gotten rid of those. And we're going to look at, so the foundation of this will be healthy fats and oils. So there we've got some coconuts, we've got some avocados, and there's good old butter there as well. Now remember that you want animal fats to be from an organic source, simply because the nutrient profile of an organic grown animal is much better than something that has been factory farmed, you know, aside from the cruelty factor. Then the other side, you've got fatty fish and meat, organ meats, and eggs. And organ meats is quite interesting, because that's the type of meats that we don't tend to eat anymore. For some cultures, definitely it was on the menu, you know, back in like peasant times. That was really seen as very peasant food. But there are lots of very important minerals and nutrients that you can get in organ meats. Now, having said that, I don't want to put vegetarians or vegans off to the side. Most people know that I was a vegetarian for 20 years as well. So I am definitely very sensitive to that side of the food spectrum. And a low carbohydrate diet can absolutely be done in a vegan or a vegetarian version as well. The issue perhaps with a vegan version of a low carbohydrate diet would be a lack of omega-3 fatty acids that you would have to supplement. That is the only thing. You know, in the same way that vegans are also usually required to supplement vitamin B12 as well, and also vitamin D. So Okay, in the middle there, and really what is the basis of all of the carbohydrates that you will be getting into your body is our non-starchy vegetables. So I've got some really nice slides coming up that show you the carbohydrate content of vegetables so that you can better choose which ones to have. Now on the next level there as well, we've got some vegetables that are slightly higher in carbohydrates, but still super healthy and super important to have in your diet as well, from a mineral and a nutrient content. So then raw, full fat, dairy. And dairy products tend to be best digested in a fermented form. So the best way to have dairy would be in a yogurt form or in a kefir form, or you can go the other side of the scale, which is like an aged cheese, because the older a cheese is, the better the lactose profile is, because it's lactose that you want to be careful of. It's a sugar, it's a carbohydrate, but it's also problematic for your body to deal with as well. And then at the top there, we've got our nuts and seeds and our berries. Now, depending on what style of low carbohydrate diet is, that will dictate whether you can dip into that top peak or not. In a ketogenic diet, it would be very sparingly that you could go in there. You can have a few nuts, you can have a few berries. But if you're talking a low carbohydrate, as in a maintenance Atkins style diet, then it's definitely something that you can have every day if you want to. All right, so let's have a look at the veggies. So these are the very low carbohydrate veggies. Now the numbers next to the vegetable are the grams of carbohydrates per 100 grams of that vegetable. So spinach is the lowest of the carbohydrates. So that's only 1 gram per 100 grams, and you can get a lot of spinach for 100 grams. That's a decent salad. And then going up to something like a cauliflower or a yellow pepper and Brussels sprouts at 5 grams. But when you're talking about 100 grams of carbs a day, that means that you can fit a lot of veggies into that, and that should be the basis of your diet, because we all know that that veggies are really good for us. So these are the healthy carbohydrates, just to show you the amounts, and this is also per 100 grams, right? So you've got peas there at 9 grams per 100, and then all the way up to quinoa, which is, touted as a fairly healthy grain. It's not really a grain, it's a seed. But yeah, and then seeing things like baked beans there as well, being less carbohydrates than quinoa as well, which is fairly surprising. And then I wanted to show you the unhealthy carbs. So this is where we really start to see the big numbers. And then when you're having 100 grams of cookies, that's not really an awful lot of cookies. Pasta as well, that is not an awful lot of pasta either. And it just goes to show you how quickly you can get to your total amount of carbohydrates in a day if you do eat these foods. Now, we also know that these foods are not the best for us. So the good thing about a low carbohydrate diet is that you have to avoid them anyway, right? You will, however, see a banana up there and an apple. The red apple, the green apples are somewhat lower and do fit into 100 grams of carbohydrates a day once in a while. All right, so I wanted to talk a little bit about some low carb hacks. But the first thing that I want to do is I'm just going to stop sharing. I just want to see if anyone's got any questions so far. If you do have a question, just pop your hand up and I'll, Firenza, let me unmute you. Here we go. Oh, I don't seem to be able to. Becca. There we go.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, Mim, first of all, hi. It's a long time that I don't see you.
Hi.
Mim, actually on the healthy carbs, I would like asking you, can we include it even like the stuffed potato? Like sweet potato, white potato, but like steamed or stuffed?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think I have a slide a little bit further that shows you the amount of carbs in a sweet potato. Yeah, of course. Look, and especially if you are active, you can probably take a few more carbs because you know that you're going to be burning those carbs in your workouts, right?
Yeah.
Then your body is a little bit better with carbs. Of course, it can be part of your diet. However, we're used to the carbohydrate part of our meal when you look at our plate being like half or a third, right? You want to just have it more like a condiment or a little bit, like half a sweet potato, something like that would be a healthier serve of carbohydrates. But absolutely, absolutely, that would still be something that you'd get a lot of nutrients from as well.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question? Yep. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely something that you can have once in a while, but it shouldn't be a staple, really, if you want to do a low carbohydrate diet. Mr. Jarman, let me try to unmute you. I can't unmute you. Oh, now I've muted you. Sorry. We're both pressing on the same button. Please go ahead and unmute yourself again, Neil.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
You can hear me. You mentioned dairy there. So what about those of us who have trouble with lactose and casein and tend to use milk substitute, dairy milk substitutes?
Yeah. So you can definitely use the substitutes. Obviously, you have to look for the ones that don't have any sugar in them. The lower carbohydrate plant milks that are best are an unsweetened almond milk, usually has the least. And you can look into using a soy milk as well. They tend to be really low in carbohydrates anyway, simply because they don't contain lactose.
Okay.
Now, and that's also why I was saying, you know, when you do eat dairy, that fermented dairy is the best because fermentation actually makes sure that the lactose is out of the dairy product.
Okay.
Yeah. Can you tolerate butter?
Yeah, no butter. I'm okay in small amounts. It's just if I have to take in, have to take in large volumes of milk. So if I were to have milk or cereal, then that's kind of borderline too much.
Yeah, I mean, look, the higher the fat content of the dairy, usually the less sugar it has in it, right? The less lactose it has. So if you're looking at things like butter or ghee, which is a clarified butter, or even cream versus milk, these all tend to be much lower in carbohydrate because they just contain less lactose.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so let me move on to the low carb hacks. So these were designed to kind of make it easy for you guys to do a little bit of swapsies, because a lot of people are like, okay, I'm going to do low carb, and then they're like, oh, but how do I actually do that? So these are a few of the little hacks that I have so that it makes it a bit easier. So for people that love their mashed potato, a really good way of substituting that is to actually use steamed cauliflower. And then if you blend that up with a little bit of butter and maybe a little bit of cream and then season it well, it actually tastes exactly like mashed potato for a lot less carbs. So that's a super easy hack that you can have. And then there is rice. People tend to miss rice when they're on a low carb diet. Now you can rice cauliflower, and I think cauliflower rice has become all of the rage these days. You can even buy it in supermarkets now in the deep freeze section. Makes it super easy. But if you want to make it yourself, you can go through the tedious action. It's kind of good for your biceps though, to use a grater and grate it. But seriously, your life is worth more than that. The easiest ways to do it is to either use your food processor, or if you don't have a food processor and you have a blender, if you pop it in your blender with a whole bunch of water, and just blend, it actually makes it into cauliflower rice. And then you can just tip it through a sieve, and then you have cauliflower rice there. That can then be steamed or microwaved, and you can either make like a fried rice with it, or you can make like a risotto, something like that. It's super tasty and super easy, and it doesn't even taste that much like cauliflower once you blend it up like that. Now, another option is what's called a shirataki noodle. It's a konjac noodle. It comes from Asia. It's like a fiber that's not able to be digested by your body. So they shape them into little noodles or rices, and you can buy them in little packets. And you can use that as a substitute for a noodle or for rice if you want to. A word of warning though with it is excessive consumption of that gives you really bad bloating, because it's undigestible, so it's got to make its way the whole way out, and a lot of people find that they might have a bit of gas or something. I don't tolerate it very well, but there are people that can tolerate it. So in terms of noodles, if you love your pasta, your spaghetti, that kind of thing, zucchini noodles, I think you can pretty much buy them in every supermarket now. Or you could go ahead and purchase a spiralizer if you really wanted to. They're not as excessively expensive as they were back in the day. Shirataki noodles, like I just mentioned, and then good old spaghetti squash. I don't know if you've come across it in the supermarket yet, but it's a big yellow, it looks like a melon, and basically you just pop it in the oven for about an hour. And once it's cooked, you just scrape it with a fork, and it looks like spaghetti. It's really great. It's a really awesome replacement for spaghetti as well, much lower in carbs, of course, than the noodles are. Now, in terms of baking, because really it's baking that we miss when we go on a low carbohydrate diet, because you can't have pancakes, you can't have cakes, you can't have bread, that kind of thing. But good substitutes for flour are almond flour or coconut flour. Now, coconut flour is a little tricky to use because it's very, very highly absorbent. But if you follow careful recipes with coconut flour, it can be a really tasty alternative. It doesn't taste coconutty at all, by the way. So, and then there's lupin flour. So lupin flour is actually from it's more like a lentil. It's from the peanut family. Actually, it's a legume, and that can be used as well to make baked goods. It's much lower in carbohydrate. Now, if you're missing crackers, what you can do is you can grate up a whole bunch of Parmesan cheese and just pop it in little spoonfuls on an oven tray. You pop that into the oven for about 15 minutes. And when it comes back out, you let it cool down, and they go into these little crispy things. So it's kind of a substitute for like a nacho or something that you want to dip. Really, really, really tasty. And then, of course, you can make crackers out of the almond flour and the lupin flour as well, which are quite nice too. When it comes to bread, and that's the main thing that people miss, you can definitely make bread out of almond flour, and then also there are a few other things that you can use instead of flour. So one of them is psyllium husk, which sounds really crazy, but it's basically you buy it in the health food store, and it's a fiber supplement. So for people who are having trouble moving their digestion along, they take psyllium husk in a glass of water, and that moves things along. That psyllium husk is very absorbent, and it makes some really nice bread. I actually have a really good recipe for that I'm going to share on a blog a little bit later in the week. It's actually from one of my cookbooks, and it's amazing. It's really good bread. You won't even miss normal bread when you've made it. The same thing, you can use oat fiber. So this is only the fiber from the oats. It doesn't have the carbohydrates that are in the oats. And then there is the cloud bread. And cloud bread is simply made of egg whites and cream cheese. And it sounds really crazy, but you whip it all up and you pop it in the oven, and it actually is almost like a naan bread. It's very cool. It's very cool. It's a nice one to try out, and you can make good sandwiches out of that one. Okay, so people are usually like, so what can I eat as a snack? Because, you know, if I get hungry in between meals, the meals are fine, but what if I get hungry in between meals? So, you know, here are some ideas. So boiled eggs are always a really good idea to have, because, you know, the other thing about boiled eggs is they fill you up a lot. It's a food that's very satiating. It also has really good fats in it that are very good for your body. Good old peanut butter and celery is a good one to have. Celery is a great vegetable to have as a low carbohydrate vegetable, so you can pretty much dip it in anything. So nuts are a great snack. Just have to make sure that you don't have too many of them, because some of them can be quite high in carbohydrates, especially things like almonds, because it's very easy to eat a lot of them. So that's always a good one to kind of just measure out and not have too much of. Cottage cheese is a great one. That one's quite low carb. Cucumber and ranch dip. Ranch dip tends to be quite low in carbohydrates, even better if you can make it yourself. Aged cheeses are really good to snack on. Tuna mayo, so grabbing a can of tuna and mixing it with some high quality mayo, not mayo made with sunflower oil or canola oil or soybean oil, because those are highly inflammatory oils. Stuffed avocado is always a nice one, or just avocados by itself. Jerky or biltong, which is a dried meat. I think Doug will know biltong, right, Doug? Yeah, it's a South African type jerky that they make. Asparagus, and you can dip that in cream cheese, or even like a Caesar salad dressing, something like that. Berries and Greek yogurt, especially if you're on like 100 grams of carbs a day, you can definitely make room for a little bit of berries and Greek yogurt. Broccoli and cheese dip, which is always a nice one to make to dip vegetable sticks into. And you've got dark chocolate there as well, which sounds pretty like on the edge, but as long as it's higher than 70%, it doesn't have a really high sugar content. I actually have a really nice hack, just in case you don't like dark chocolate, 70% dark chocolate or higher. I actually have a hack, and I'll share it in the same blog, where you can make it a little bit sweeter without adding any carbohydrates to it. So that's always a good fun thing to be able to do. Okay, now I wanted to touch on low carb sweeteners, because a lot of people, when they go on a low carb diet, they start to make the foods that they missed with more low carb friendly things that you can put in. So we've got a whole bunch of different low carb sweeteners, and they can all be even as sweet or sweeter than sugar. However, they are sweet by taste and not actually contain much carbohydrates. Whereas on the other side of that slide, you can see what we're looking for with the high carbohydrate sugars. So for 100 grams of white sugar, you got 100 grams of carbs, right? That's fairly simple to figure out. So we've got stevia, and stevia is a plant that's really, really, really sweet. If you eat the leaves, it actually tastes really sweet, but it's carb free. Kind of a little bit like, I don't know if anyone used to chew on licorice wood as a kid. You know, my parents are from Holland, and in Holland, it's a very normal thing. We call it sweet wood. And basically you chew on it, it's like a stick, but it's like super, super sweet. And it's licorice root. And that's the same thing. It's not got any carbohydrate in it, but it tastes really sweet. And stevia is the same, and they extract the sweetness and make it into a drop. So for a cup of coffee, you just put 2 or 3 drops in there and be as sweet as you putting 2 sugars in a coffee as well. Then we've got the alcohol, sugar alcohols. That doesn't mean that you get drunk off them. That's just, it's just the molecular structure. So that's called erythritol and xylitol. So you guys have probably heard of xylitol. They put it in a lot of like chewing gums and stuff because it's meant to be really good for your teeth. So erythritol and xylitol do not have an effect on blood sugar. So that's why they're considered good sweeteners. They're also zero carb. However, they do have a downside. Number one, they're not very well researched, so we don't actually know what they do long term. And number two is they tend to be really hard on your digestion. So having excessive amounts of these things can really cause a lot of bloat, gas, and pain. So that's something that you want to kind of avoid. Then you've got your sweeteners like aspartame and sucralose and phenylalanine, which are, you know, what's in Diet Coke and what's in Coke Zero. And we all know that that stuff's not very good for us. But these things could be used in the beginning of a low carbohydrate diet if you're really missing the sweet taste. But the aim of a low carbohydrate diet would be to decrease your cravings for sweet so that you don't have those urges to eat a lot of sweet food at the same time. And then via the hormonal pathways of your body, you should feel less hungry all the time as well. So yeah, this is where we are with these sweeteners. The only one that I would really recommend for people to use sparingly is stevia. That's the only one because it's a natural occurring sweetener. The rest of them, they're problematic. And then obviously the other side of that chart there, you want to avoid those. Sometimes we're told that, you know, putting maple syrup or honey in our food is healthier, but in terms of carbohydrates, they contain just as much carbohydrate as sugar does, and that has the same effect on the body as well. You might have a few added minerals from honey, but it is also not as it's only minorly beneficial to your body. Yeah. So let me just stop sharing. Okay. Good. So does anyone have any questions now that we've gotten to the end? You can go ahead and unmute yourselves now. I think we can chat. Did you get most of that, Samer? How was your meeting?
It's a daily meeting, so it was boring.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that you could actually join us. It's really good to see you.
And thank you for the information.
Oh, Summer, hi. It's Robin.
Hello.
Oh, it's you.
I can see. It's your iPhone. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, okay. So yeah, if I'm going to recommend a stevia, Amal, I would recommend using the drops. So it comes in a little bottle with a little pipette, and then you can just drop a few drops into drinks. And it's much better because what happens with the packets that look like sugar is they have to use a filler in there, and they tend to be made from dextrose, which is a carbohydrate in itself. So it is usually best to just sweeten things with a couple of drops of stevia. That is, you can buy Truvia off a website called Ingfit, INGFIT. Yeah, they do. They specialize in ketogenic and low carbohydrate and paleo stuff. So they usually have it. And then iHerb is another, you can order in from iHerb. So it's an application you download onto your phone. It comes from the States. And they have everything, right? Anything that you might be missing in terms of, you know, like almond flour, all of that kind of stuff as well. They have all of that too. Oh, do you? You sell it, Fiorenza. There you go, Fiorenza, meet Danielle. I'll connect you guys afterwards. Easy. Okay, Emma, do you want to tell us what garlic mozzarella bread is?
Yeah, well, if you Google the recipe, I think it's, I've only made it a couple of times and it's been a while. Shredded mozzarella with almond flour, an egg, and I think cream cheese. And then you mix it all together to form a dough and then bake that.
Oh, nice.
So another one,
you
just
can
Google
make
it.
a nice pizza base out of that as
Yeah,
well, right? Yeah.
Yeah, no, it was good.
I've been experimenting with cauliflower pizza bases, but Rebecca is still the champion in cauliflower pizza bases. Hit her up for her recipe. She's really good at it, by the way, guys. Does anyone else have any questions? Sorry, I'm just... Is coconut sugar healthy? Look, Swati, in the same way that I said, you know, like people say that it's better to have honey than it is to have sugar. Yeah, it is. But if we go back to that slide that I had, coconut sugar has just the same amount of carbohydrate as normal sugar does as well. So just using it very, very sparingly, remembering that 1 gram is 1 gram of carbohydrates. And then just factoring that into your 100 grams of carbohydrate per day. So yeah, it can be part of a low carbohydrate diet, but it is a sugar. So it's the same, it has the same effect on the body as what table sugar has that you put in your coffee and tea. So, so yeah, it's from a slightly better source, but it's still a refined sugar because they have to do a lot to get coconut sugar from coconut. Does that help? Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. So I remember that agave syrup was like really big for a while as well, but that also is a highly refined processed sugar in the same way as you know, like a maple syrup and that kind of thing could be as well. Did you have a question, Danielle? Yeah.
Yes, just a quick one. Bars, those you know, protein bars. Are there any good brands, any better brands than others?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of carbohydrate content, there are definitely. Sorry?
Carbohydrate and healthy in general. People tell me.
Yeah, I mean, look, I always tell people that they should probably look for their protein in the form of whole foods, simply because that is the way that our bodies were designed to receive protein. So when you break down protein into, you know, a part like you do with a protein powder, like a whey protein or a hemp protein or whatever protein it is, you do lose a lot of the other biological information that you would have had in the whole food. And our bodies don't work by simple processes. Our bodies take a lot of the information from foods and use it. So, you know, unless you have a diet that is very low in protein, I wouldn't actually ever recommend that you take a protein bar. However, sometimes, you know, you need something as a snack. And then the ones that I would recommend are things like Quest bars. I don't know, have you heard of Quest? Yeah. They do tend to make very naughty flavors though. I got hooked on birthday cake ones. Rebecca and I even had one today. But they only have 4 grams of sugar in them. And it's the same as having chocolate, right? You should have it once in a while as a treat and not as something that you eat every day. Having good sources of food is much more important. But of course, you know, sometimes we have to have foods that nourish our soul more than our body. And then birthday cake Quest bars is something that I highly recommend. Try them, they'll change your life.
Yeah,
Actually, don't try them. Okay. All right, no worries, Robin. I will pop those two in the chat right now. So one is called iHerb with a little I and a big H, and the other one is called ingbet.com. Okay, so Doug's got a question. Cream in coffee instead of butter, and how much? Yeah, look, are we talking in a fasted state, or are we talking just day to day?
It's just day to day. I do the fasting, what you suggested. So I finish eating at 8 in the evening, and then I'll eat again at sort of 10 or 11 at lunchtime. But I have a coffee in the mornings with cream, and then I'll have maybe 3 or 4 coffees. I have 3 or 4 coffees throughout the day with cream. So I'm just wondering, because third of my question.
When you're fasting, I would recommend that you don't have more than a tablespoon of cream, just enough to turn your coffee white, and not go over the top, because obviously fasting means not having any calories. And even though a small amount of fat won't have an effect on your blood sugar, that's what we're looking for when we're fasting. If we have too much, then it's more calories, right? And then you're not technically fasting anymore. And then, you know, with the fat content of cream versus the fat content of butter is obviously a little bit more, but still no more than a tablespoon for fasting. We try to keep it under 50 calories per drink.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And then when you're not fasting, obviously, then that doesn't really matter.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. And just in terms of coffees throughout the day, I mean, I have about 3 or 4 coffees throughout the day, maybe even a bit more. Is that okay? Is that right?
Yeah, that's okay. Actually, the research shows that it's actually beneficial to drink coffee in the morning, especially in a fasted state, because it actually boosts your metabolism and boosts a lot of the effects of fasting as well.
Okay, cool.
So that it's not, you know, it's also handy in case you get a hunger pang, because coffee
Yes.
takes it away, right?
Okay, cool.
Yeah, cool. Oh, okay, Amal, I will send you my list of snacks after this, okay? And organic raw chocolate, 70% cacao, I would say that would definitely fit into a low carbohydrate diet. Robin, you'd have to look at the carb content. And that should tell you, but it shouldn't be too, you know, as long as it's 70% or higher, then the sugar content is not that high anyway. And yeah, I mean, a raw cacao is going to be better than a dark chocolate based on cocoa as well, because it's raw and it's hopefully organic. Did you say organic? Yep, organic, always best. Okay, anyone else have any more questions?
There is a question that was missed. Basically, I've seen some keto, what do you call it? The tablets or the supplements, in case you have them very less in your body, just to encourage, where is the question? The ketones supplement. It could either come as, as a supplement or a powder. Would you encourage to have those or no?
Okay. I love this question. Thank you so much for asking this.
Anytime.
Rebecca, you can see Rebecca's face already, because I'm going to get on my pedestal and preach now. Ready, Becca? Okay. There are big multi-level marketing companies out there pushing ketone supplements at the moment. The one thing that I want you to remember is that a state of ketosis is a natural state in the body, where there is an absence of carbohydrates and the body is burning fat as fuel. That is the only time that you have ketones present in the body. Now, if your body is burning carbohydrates, which a lot of people are because they're not doing a low carbohydrate or keto diet, if you then start adding ketones into that mix, that is a completely unnatural situation that does not happen in nature. These ketone supplement companies have not done any research as to whether that's actually safe or not. And it's absolutely shocking that they're allowed to sell these ketone supplements to people who are not in a state of ketosis. Now, having said that, I do use ketone supplements sometimes when I am doing a ketogenic diet, but I do not use them when I'm not in ketosis. Now, how do you know if you're in ketosis? You need to do a test, either a urine test or a blood test. You can get little machines for that these days. And if you do decide to do a ketogenic diet, let me know, I'm going to help you, and we will be able to figure out when you're in ketosis. But please do not fall victim to these really, really expensive supplements that tell you that they are going to help you lose weight when they're putting your body in a situation that has never been researched before. It doesn't happen in nature, and they don't know what's going to happen. They're just touting them as the best thing since sliced bread. But I would be very cautious because it's not a natural situation for your body. And I know some very good friends of mine sell them, and I just disagree. I've actually told them about the fact that, it's unresearched, and I don't think that it's a responsible situation to be selling these things unless, clinical trials have been done. But of course, they have to walk their own path in life. But I would caution anyone to not take ketone supplements unless you are in a state of ketosis, because that's the only natural situation in which your body would have ketones in it. Yeah. Fiorenzo is asking, protein pancakes. Is that a premix? You sell a premix? Oh, okay. Well, I would have to have a look at the ingredients in it, babe. A lot of things are marketed as high protein. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're low carb. You have to always check the carbohydrate content of everything. But I have a few really good low carbohydrate pancake recipes that I have in some of my cookbooks that are really tasty as well, and super easy to make because, pancakes are pretty easy anyway. But I am very willing to have a look at the ingredients and let you know, babe. And pro bars, I have seen pro bars. I'm not sure what the carbohydrate content or the content of those are. So, but once again, I would say that it should be more of a treat thing, more like think of it as a chocolate bar, think of it as a Kit Kat, and we probably shouldn't be eating those every day. But if you're in a bind and there's nothing else to eat, then maybe that's what you should eat that day, and then just make sure that you have healthy food afterwards, right? Okay. Well, if that's the end of the questions, then I'm going to say, guys, thank you so much for spending this time with me. It's really great to see all your faces. Thank you so much for coming. Mr. Franklin, thank you for coming. It's really good to see you. We should talk more. Thank you so much. I hope that you all have a very pleasant evening, and I hope to see you all soon. Thanks, guys. Bye.
Thanks, Mim. Bye.
Thanks, Mim.